There's actually a way to get out of autofill, though. This is not new information. Like I said, a lot of people already know this, but you want to see what it is? All you got to do is cancel the lobby, remake it, and ta-da, autofill is gone. All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Today we're back with another video where we're going to be talking about something that I've seen a surprisingly small amount of people talk about. I don't know if everyone is actually outraged about this and they're just not expressing their outrage. I mean, people are usually pretty good about doing that on the internet, but in the last patch, Riot made a pretty massive change that seems like it's gone largely unnoticed by the community. Autofill is now enabled in every queue. Normal draft, ranked flex, ranked solo, every single queue, and in every single rating, bronze through challenger, autofill is always enabled at all times. Let me remind you, the beautiful new champion select that everyone loves that allows you to play just one or two roles that you main, one or two roles that you actually want to play, that new champion select that everyone loves is essentially being made null and void, since with autofill permanently enabled, Riot is just saying this system can choose you at random to not get one of your two roles and instead play support if we need more supports at the moment, and this can happen to you regardless of the time of day or when you queue up or what roles you want to play. Then again, if you are a support main, I think you're probably pretty safe from all this. The reason I think this change hasn't really been discussed by that many people is the large amount of streamers in the community and a lot of the popular faces that are pro players or former pro players. This doesn't really affect the games of those specific players. All pro players and high rated players, people in challenger, they were basically dealing with autofill always on all the time, every game anyway, so that's probably why none of them are coming out and complaining about this issue. However, this is a change that doesn't really make any sense for the majority of players. Diamond 5 and above makes up about 2% of the player base. If autofill really is needed up there, fine, go ahead and do it, but why activate it for everyone below that rating all the time? The thing about autofill is its purpose is obviously to reduce queue times, which is something that players really wanted and needed when dynamic queue was first introduced and the new champion select first came out. I mean, queue times at the challenger level could last longer than the game itself, which was a massive problem. I mean, they were upwards of like 50 minutes or so, but the lower and lower you go in rating, the less and less autofill is really needed. Like, I don't work for Riot, so I obviously don't have specific numbers, but let's say for argument's sake that if you enable autofill for everyone, then that will cut queue times in half roughly when it's turned on for players in a rating. So, okay, cutting a 50-minute queue time down to 25 minutes for challenger players, that's a massive improvement. That's a whole 20-minute game plus 5-minute champion select that you're shaving off there. But when you go down even just to low diamond, I mean, personally speaking, I never ran into queue times that seemed like much of a problem in these ratings. I think the longest queue time I would ever have to deal with was probably 10 to 15 minutes. But okay, maybe in low diamond, shaving off 5 minutes of wait time might be valuable, and some people might get bored if they're just sitting in queue for 10 minutes, so cutting that down could be useful, but that's still just the top 2% of players out there. Imagine getting down to the gold ratings, the silver ratings, the bronze ratings, where queue times were anywhere between like 2 to 5 minutes. You're only really shaving off a minute or two with autofill in that scenario if you're still cutting it in half, and I'd wager the majority of players out there would rather wait the extra 60 seconds to get a role they actually want to play rather than have a minute shorter queue but have to play support. Not to mention, I don't need to tell you guys, autofill is something that everybody hates. I mean, nobody likes autofill. Nobody queues up for a game wanting to play a champion or a new role or whatever, and then they get autofilled onto support, and they're just saying, oh boy, I sure do love getting to play support when I didn't queue up for it. I mean, Riot knew. I actually wanted to play support. I thought I wanted to play top lane, but Riot knows what I want. I don't know what I want. Nobody is saying that. That's ridiculous. Everyone hates it, and Riot has acknowledged this, doing multiple things to minimize its effect in games. If you get autofilled in a game, then the next few games that you queue up in, you won't get autofilled. You'll have autofill protection, and you also have autofill protection if you're ever in a promo series. Riot has made strides to acknowledge that autofill is not a perfect system, and they've tried to minimize its effect. But if we're acknowledging this is a really frustrating and terrible system that everyone hates, why are we turning it on in every queue all the time forever? This change just seems to be doubling down on a bad system when everything was kind of all right in the first place. Look, the thing I take issue with here is by enabling autofill autofill at all moments of the day. This might actually make things just as bad, if not worse, than the old queuing system that we had before all of this. When you have a matchmaking queue, there are three big things that it should strive to do that we've talked about previously when dynamic queue was a big debacle. The first of which is a queuing system should give you fair matches where each side has a 50% chance of winning. A queuing system should also be relatively quick in finding a match. You shouldn't have to sit around all day to play one game. And a queuing system should give you some control over what role you want to play, or give some sort of structure in assigning roles to a team. In the previous draft mode, that last bit, role selection, was completely absent, and teams were just left up to their own devices to pick and choose what roles they wanted to play when they got into a champion select. Pick order typically trumped everything in the end if there was some sort of disagreement between players, but this system had a few benefits. Namely, you would only get support as low as 20% of the time, right? Because 20% of the time, you'd be stuck on last pick and left with whatever it is that the team gave you if nobody was willing to compromise. Except that 20% number actually goes a lot lower. There was a lot of discussion and compromise in champion selects for the most part that typically drove that number down. Sometimes there would be a duo queue that wanted to go bot lane. Sometimes there would be a support main who was a higher pick. Sometimes someone would want to take support off your hands if you said support was your worst role, or you didn't have a rune page for it or something. So in actuality, it felt like you ended up with support maybe 10% to 15% of games that you played. I mean, I can't really remember being forced to support that frequently even, and the higher you climbed in rating, the more teammates were willing to be reasonable and compromise, driving that number down consistently over time, at least in my experience. I know it's a personal anecdote, it's not relevant for everyone, but in playing in that old queue system myself, I felt like there were very few instances where I was forced to support or not able to get a role that I wanted to play. The thing that sucks so much about autofill is that you are stuck with the short end of the stick if you get autofilled. Getting autofilled in champion select is, you are getting a sentence of you have to play support for the next 20 minutes. It's worse than getting last pick because there's no room for discussion or compromise. You're supporting. You get support. I mean, people won't trade you. Everyone else queued up for roles that they want to play. Why should they trade with you? Support is right next to your name. The system ends up making the new queue a double-edged sword, where if you don't get autofilled, you're guaranteed one of the two roles you selected before queuing up. You'll get to play your main role a higher percentage of the time than in the old system. Again, depending on the role, but when you get stuck on support, that's worse than getting last pick in the old queue. There is no negotiation. There is no hope, nothing. If autofill is ever giving players in any ratings support more than 10% to 20% of the time, it's already worse than the old system. And at the end of the day, I thought that's what this whole new queue was about. The old queue did nothing for role selection, and it only focused on giving fair matches relatively quickly. I thought this new queue was Riot's way of saying, hey, we're gonna sacrifice a little bit of the queue time factor in this trio so we can give you something we've never given before, and that is role selection. Autofill just destroys all of this. When you autofill someone, you're taking away the role selection for the player that gets autofilled, obviously, and you're also diminishing the match quality because it kind of ruins a game when you have someone on your team that doesn't have a support rune page, someone who's never played support before, and you end up just losing bot lane for your team and surrendering at 20. That's all for the sake of shorter queue times? As I was making this video, Riot put out a post titled "Queue Health Comes to the Patch Notes," where they talk about outlining their new plans for the queues in the upcoming season. Namely, they mention how they'll be giving us regular updates on changes they make to the queues in the patch notes, as the title says. They also express concern that ranked flex at the moment might not be seeing enough solo players to keep it entirely healthy, and it may end up failing the queue, so they'll have to revert it to the old ranked 5s style queue if they can't get enough solo players to play it enough. This is the reason that you can't queue as 4 players in ranked flex at the moment. There's already a lack of solos with solo duo queue out right now. After reading this post and giving some more thought to all this, I feel like the enable autofill always decision was made by someone to anticipate and preemptively deal with longer queue times that may arise when the season starts. Maybe this is why Riot is making this change when everything is already fine at the moment at least, but it still doesn't seem to make sense to me. If autofill is required for people at the highest rating, or maybe required for people in flex queue, turn it on more frequently for those people in the higher ratings or flex queue. It doesn't seem to make sense to devalue the amazing system that we got last season when everyone was happy and excited with how things were. Maybe circumstances will change that will require more autofills in the future, but just increase the frequency of it as it's needed. This blanket move by Riot seems to be giving a pretty disappointing result. Quick personal anecdote here, so take it with a grain of salt. I've been playing a lot of ranked Ranked Flex lately since I'm trying to play some new champions for videos, and Ranked Flex is a little more forgiving since the matchmaking is messed up at the moment, and I play against a lot of lower rated players, so it's more forgiving games where I can make more mistakes if I'm playing a new champion. This means, though, when I'm queuing up, I'm hoping for a role. I'm hoping for a specific role. I'm hoping for top lane so I can play Singed or whatever, and it feels like maybe about 60% of the queues I get my role. Again, this is just my personal experience, and maybe the lack of solo players playing Ranked Flex has something to do with this, so don't take this as law, but it feels like around 60% of the time I get my primary, 20% of the time I get my secondary, and a second 20% of the time I have to dodge because I get auto-filled onto support. I really hope Riot reverses this, or at least gives some sort of explanation, because match quality seems to drop, not only because I don't always get my role and I either have to dodge or play support, but also because people are getting auto-filled all the time onto support, and I have to deal with them, and they always lose bot lane, and then we lose the game. I mean, it feels like it has to be in much less than 10% of queues people get auto-filled for it to really feel that good or okay. If Riot came out with some sort of statistics, that would be nice to see. How often do people really get autofilled, and is it always onto support? But I just hope that Riot hasn't lost their way. These past few months have been so exciting with so many of the changes they've made, you know, like the replays and sandbox mode and all that. So it's frustrating to see them slip up with these small little missteps for the company that seems to be trying to strive for perfection and making the player base happy again. For them to make these little mistakes, just please, God, take autofill away. I'm trying to make this Singed video. Anyway, though, those are all just my opinions. You guys can, of course, leave your own in the comments down below. You really should, because apparently I can't be a YouTuber unless I beg for comments and likes. Maybe I'll talk about that tomorrow. But anyway, I'll see you guys all tomorrow. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.